Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Adam Green here with NoMoreNews.org. Today is Thursday, February 27th, 2020. Thank you for joining me. Today we are going to be talking one of the most controversial, taboo, sacrilegious topics. We are talking Hitler, the Holocaust, Nazis, World War II, and modern day Zionism, Jewry, communism, a bunch of topics. So because of that, we are streaming exclusively on DLive. We're not on YouTube, only on DLive, and afterwards this will be archived to BitChute, where there's no censorship. Joining me today, once again, is author and researcher Christopher John Bjerknes. His books, cjbbooks.com, his blog, jewishlacism.com, and he's on BitChute as well under the same name, CJB Books. Thank you so much for joining me once again, Chris. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much.
So the day has finally come. Congratulations, you have finished your trilogy.
I hope my trilogy doesn't become my eulogy. There was a lot of people who didn't want to see these books put out.
Yes, this is going to cause quite a stir. It's going to start up a debate, and things are going to get heat up with this, wouldn't you
I
say?
certainly hope so, because it's well worth having the debate.
I agree. This is incredibly thought-provoking and interesting information with your unique perspective on all this, which I think, quite honestly, makes a lot of sense. So your new book out today is Adolf Hitler, Bolshevik and Zionist, Volume 3. And
No,
this,
no, no,
I'm
no.
sorry,
Volume
my
2, Volume 2.
apology, my apology.
Easy mistake to make because I
Yes.
skipped over Volume 2.
Right. So you actually have volume two out. It's just got released on Amazon. The links will all be in the description below, and I'll put them in the chat. I've got volume one here, or I'm sorry, volume three is here, which is World War One on my Kindle reader. I have part one, and I just ordered part two, so it's in the mail coming tomorrow. I can't wait to read it. What's some of the topics you cover in part two?
Part 2 is subtitled Zionism. And the topics that I cover are the transfer agreement, the Ankara document, and various other factual evidence that proves that the Nazis and Zionists collaborated to found the nation of Israel, and that Hitler was acting as the Messiah of the Jews to drive the Jews of Europe down into Palestine.
Well, the term you suggested for the title was stooge, and I thought, is that the best word? So I looked it up and saw that stooge really was a fitting word, actually. So let me do a stooge look again. Stooge is a person who serves merely to support or assist others, particularly in doing unpleasant work. So these are the backs.
Shabbos Goy is another way of putting it.
And this is gonna this pisses some people off. I'll just put it bluntly, because they see Hitler as fighting the international Jewry, and that he was fighting the Masons, and that he was a hero to some people, and they're really trying to kind of revive his turn him into like some kind of a hero figure. These are the backs of your books. What if you could, in like elevator pitch summary of the summary thesis of these three books?
The thesis is that the two world wars were engineered by Zionist Jews, Jewish bankers, and communists in order to destroy Europe, make Europe communist, and to initially seize Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. And then when the the Jewish masses refused to move to Palestine after the Balfour Declaration, to put the fear of God into the Jews so that they would then return. And there are many other theses which I think are new that appear in my book. And one of them is that they utilize the Holocaust as a means of creating artificial and natural selection to put new flesh on the dry bones of Israel and make the Jewish people a better genetic stock than they were before the Holocaust.
Yeah. And we will get into some of that evidence. So, the majority of the normies out there in the mainstream, they believe Hitler is the epitome of evil. He just hated Jews more than anybody. He wanted to kill them all and exterminate them with the final solution. And then there's the revisionist, which is they think that Hitler was actually the good side, and that he was fighting. They lie about him, which you agree that there's a lot of lies about him too. But and now yours is like a different perspective that which actually the Jews will probably get most mad about, because you're actually saying that actually he wasn't just a natural organic thing. They were behind him and actually behind their own people's suffering.
Well, Hitler began as a Bolshevik in the Bavarian Soviet Republic, and he was caught, according to Douglas Reed, serving as a bodyguard for the Leninist Jew Eugen Leviné. And when that happened, the army recruited him as a spy to establish an anti-Semitic, anti-Bolshevik party. So he became the controlled opposition to the Bolshevik revolutions in Bavaria, because they asserted that they wanted to prevent any additional such revolutions. So it's very clear that Hitler began his career as a Bolshevik. He states in Mein Kampf that he heavily studied Marx. It's well known that he studied Marx. Rauschning and others record the fact that Hitler remained a Marxist throughout his career. And he served Jewry in two primary ways. He greatly expanded the Soviet regime and gave Kaganovich and Stalin control of all of Eastern Europe and a large portion of Germany that became the German Democratic Republic in East Germany. So I don't see how they can view Hitler as a hero when he did that to the Eastern Europeans and caused the death of tens of millions of Gentiles deliberately. And all this was predicted in the late 30s by the Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia. He knew that Hitler would instigate a war and that Stalin would then be able to overtake all of Eastern Europe, and he was looking forward to have the Soviet Union as the border of Czechoslovakia. So it was well known that Hitler was a stooge working for the communists. It was lesser known that Hitler was a stooge working also for Zionism, and that became apparent in the transfer agreement, which was originally Theodor Herzl's plan, which he formulated in 1895 and then published in 1896 as a book called The Jewish State, A Final Solution to the Jewish Problem. So it was the Jews who came up with the idea of the final solution to the Jewish problem, and that final solution to the Jewish problem was to put anti-Semites into power, which is exactly what Herzl said, and then to give the anti-Semitic governments that they established an incentive to send the Jews to Palestine through an economic transfer of goods and Jews to Palestine, which would profit the anti-Semitic governments. And that's exactly what Hitler did with the transfer agreement beginning in 1933, long after Theodor Herzl conceived of the plan and published the plan publicly.
I just want to say, there's probably going to be people watching this that they've seen some documentaries and they've seen some pro Hitler stuff out there, and they're going to say, "How could you say this? Hitler spoke against the Jews. He was anti-Bolshevik. He was anti-communist. How could he be working for them?" And I just ask people to have an open mind and look at some of this information, and don't just dismiss thousands of pages with hundreds and hundreds of footnotes just because it's not what you have already heard. It's easier to fool people than convince them they've been fooled. So I just want people to be open to this and look at this information that we're going to get into today.
About 2,000 years before Hitler, the Jews predicted 2,000 years later that they would ingather in Palestine under persecution, and that's exactly what happened. If they believe that's a coincidence, I think they've been duped. In terms of trying to conceive of this, which runs so counter to what people have been indoctrinated from, both those who have a history of idolizing National Socialism and those who have a history of Holocaust mythologies. Consider if an angel came down to one of the Warburgs, be it Max, Paul, or Sidney, who's supposedly a mythical Warburg, and no, let's make it a demon from hell. A demon from hell came to the Warburgs and said, "What if I were to give you a shouting man who raved about the Jews and would segregate all the Jews, would attack Eastern Europe so he could gain access to the Jews and expand the Soviet Union. And all you had to do was put up a little bit of money. And then this man would terrify all the Jews in Europe and eventually arrange an economic deal which would send talented German Jews who were the fittest to survive and to create a new state down to Palestine, together with money. And that if you put up a little money and tried to prevent any boycotts happening against this new man's regime, which we'll call the Nazi regime, all this will give you all of Eastern Europe, parts of Germany, potentially the spread of communism around the world, and it will give you the nation of Palestine and the incentive for the Jews to go there and stay there. Do you think Max Warburg would accept that deal? Well, he certainly did, and he financed that guy, Adolf Hitler. And he put that guy, Adolf Hitler, into the Chancellery of Germany. That's exactly what happened. That's indisputable. There's irrefutable evidence that the Warburgs financed Hitler and ensured that he became Chancellor of Germany, that he instigated a war against the Soviet Union so that Stalin and Kaganovich could take over all of Eastern Europe. And he created world sympathy for Jewry and terror among the Jews that the only way that they could defend themselves would be to form a nation in Palestine. Now, just coincidentally, this all fits in exactly with the Jewish plans of Jewish messianic prophecy, which are supposedly thousands of years old, even older than the time of Christ, which we know are at least 500 years older than the time of Christ. And all of these events took place at exactly the dates that the Jews predicted. They predicted that Israel would be founded in 1948, hundreds of years before it was. They predicted that 6 million Jews would be killed, and then they put out the propaganda that 6 million Jews were killed.
So if anybody disagrees with that, I just want to show.
This is all according to plan.
Yeah, and I want to show right now that this is on CBN. That's just Jim Bakker's The 700, or that's Pat Robertson. CBN with Jim Bakker. Listen, they're saying the exact same thing about Gematria, They Shall Return, 1948, all predicted. Here we go.
We spoke about this code when you look at when Moses gave the law of the Jubilee, and he says, you shall return. In that word, you shall return, is a code that actually comes out to, in Hebrew, 1948, which is the year that Israel returns. I mean,
so this is something that they believe. And this guy is a huge rabbi that's all in with the Christian Zionists, very similar to Hagee. And we're going to show some Hagee, some stuff he was saying that totally aligns with your theory, essentially.
And not only that, after the Holocaust happened, we have the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, Ovadia Yosef, stating that the 6 million Holocaust victims were reincarnations of the souls of sinners, people who transgressed and did all sorts of things which should not be done. They had been reincarnated in order to atone. Now, those same biblical prophecies predicted that the Jews could only return once they had atoned. And many of the false messiahs of the Jews looked upon massive pogroms of the Jews as if an indication that Jewry had finally atoned, and they declared themselves Messiah. Shabbatai Tzvi is a perfect example. After the massive pogroms in the Ukraine, he announced that he was the Messiah in 1666 because he said the Jews had finally atoned. So we have this pattern throughout history of the Jews claiming that they needed a massive sacrifice. According to Gematria, 6 million Jews, 1/3 of Jewry, supposedly at the time of the Holocaust, would have to be burned as a sacrifice, which is what Holocaust means. And then they will have atoned for their sins and be allowed by their God to return to Palestine. So they set it up that way. They created the illusion that this had happened so that they could justify themselves religiously and politically to steal the land of the Palestinians, who had absolutely nothing to do with the Holocaust.
Ben-Gurion
and it
even
also
said
gave
that.
them the pretext to have the Bolshevik takeover of Eastern Europe.
And Ben-Gurion said that too, that the Arabs had nothing to do with had nothing to do with it. Why should they get to take their land, and that they shouldn't give it up? Tell us
Yeah, I
about
quote
this.
Ben Gurion extensively, many quotes from Ben Gurion. And Ben Gurion was also stating that the First World War gave us Palestine, the First World War gave us the Balfour Declaration, and the Second World War will give us Palestine.
Who was it that was talking about Holocaust years before the 40s? Also, they were using the same term, predicting all of it. Even the 6 million was in the news and being repeated around, and then also
It
the
was
term.
mostly, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, go ahead.
It was mostly, it's all in Don Heddesheimer's book, um, The First Holocaust, I think he called it, or something like that. And I've noted that that's been removed from archive.org since my book appeared. He collected all kinds of newspaper articles, primarily from Jewish relief organizations, excuse me, and from Zionists who were warning the Jews that there were 6 million Jews in peril of a Holocaust. And this was during World War I and much prior to World War I.
It's truly some amazing info you put together, and so many footnotes and writings of Einstein, Herzl, Ben Gurion, Baruch, Howard Mendel House. So many of these early Zionists. Um, Look at this: Amazon halts sale of books assailed as Nazi propaganda. So just this week, they came after more books on Amazon because of this Hunter's show.
Julius Streicher was named Abraham Goldberg. His ashes were, the title put on his ashes was Abraham Goldberg, and then they were cast into a river. And the major cartoonist and article writer for Streicher was a Jew, a crypto Jew.
How about that? So that's the other thing with the legacy of the Holocaust is it gives the Jews like a trump card to be immune from criticism, so that anybody that calls out Zionism or Judaism or Jews is labeled a Nazi and a Hitler lover and suppressed. And now it's intensifying so crazy with these TV shows and propaganda that they say anybody that talks about Jews is a Nazi, and then we deserve to. They're encouraging people to basically go out and attack Nazis, not to mention
That was,
deplatform and.
Berna was saying that back in the early 1800s, that anybody who criticizes Jews should end up in prison or the insane asylum. And I sent you a quote in 1946 of that man who was saying the same thing, that anyone who criticizes Jews, yeah, there it is in that book. There's a quote talking about Esau. And he said that if Esau, who hates the Jews, criticizes the Jews, he should be put into an insane asylum or jail. But that was a much earlier idea established by Berna. And then Sigmund Freud tried to establish the idea that anti-Semitism is a mental illness so that psychiatrists could commit people who were supposedly engaging in the psychotic behavior of anti-Semitism. And Lenin said that anti-Semitism was a crime punishable by death. So we are under the same Leninist Bolshevik regime of these top Jewish leaders who insist that we obey their Leninist democratic centralism, whereby they assert a dogma. That dogma cannot be criticized once it's established, and anyone who speaks out against that dogma is a psychotic criminal who must be killed. That's exactly what happened in the very early Soviet Union. It was the first laws of the Soviet Union, and they have turned the United States into a branch of that Bolshevik revolution, whereby our free speech rights are inhibited, and the next thing they're going to start doing is lining us up and shooting us. And they'll probably make public spectacles out of the execution of people like me for telling the truth about them.
Well, they very clearly believe that the West, the Christian European West, is modern day Esau, which is in the end times is either going to serve them and be righteous Noahide Gentiles or be exterminated.
Well, that's what these stupid Christian Zionists don't understand, is that the Israelis view America as Esau, as Edom, as Amalek, as their primary enemy, Haman, that has to be hanged on his own gallows. So they are setting up the United States to be destroyed. they're so foolish, these Christian Zionists, to help their worst enemies who are out to chop their heads off under the Noahide laws. It's a form of insanity as far as I'm concerned. They're suicidal, even though they don't really realize it. They are working with the enemy to establish the enemy's power so that the enemy then has power to chop their heads off. And they think that Jesus is going to come down, they're going to be raptured, and none of these horrific things are going to happen to them. Well, we'll see what happens when coronavirus hits the U.S. Are these Christian Zionists raptured away from it? Or are they going to die with everybody else?
I had you on 1 or 2 weeks ago to talk about the coronavirus, and since then, I just saw a headline that Israel's about to come out with their vaccine for the coronavirus, and also there was a rabbi that said that the coronavirus won't go away until the third temple is built. So,
well, there's their threat and their leverage.
let me bring you back on the topic here about the atonement and in the messianic prophecy of the Holocaust. This is from a movie in the early 90s called Believer, about a young kosher Jewish Nazi who became the leader of a neo-Nazi movement. This is him. He got in trouble and they forced him to go to like some kind of counseling where he talks to Holocaust survivors. And this is what he says. Check this out.
Hitler was real. God created him to punish the Jews for abandoning the Torah.
Oh, for God's sake, I am not here.
Remember who you're talking to.
It is you who are putzes.
Okay, so God created Hitler to punish us.
Hitler was real. God created him to punish the Jews for abandoning the Torah.
Oh, for God's sake, I am not here.
Remember who you're talking to.
It is you who are putzes.
So this is what they believe. This is mainstream belief, essentially, that even their persecution by Esau is to make them stronger, like in a eugenics type of way.
Well, let's look at who they consider to be God. They consider their own people to be God. Moses Hess, really, who was a stronger Zionist even than Herzl, and really established the Jewish side as an agent of the Rothschild family to push for Zionism, said that since God hadn't done it, the Jewish people have to do it. And it's part of their racial instincts that they have to engage in a war against Germany, specifically Germany, Hess said. Now, let's look at this war between Jacob and Esau. The Jews often have the refrain that Esau hates Jacob and Jacob tricks Esau. And that's exactly what they set up in Nazi Germany, was that Esau would hate Jews and that they would use Esau's hatred of Jews as a trap so that they could expand the Soviet Union and terrify the Jews and scare them into moving to Palestine and staying in Palestine. And that's what this man is talking about. It's not really God that does it. It's the Jewish people that do it. Now, who's the head of the Jewish people and God's representative on earth? That would be the Jewish Messiah. And the Jews have had a Messiah ever since Shabbatai Tzvi. There's a dynasty. And this dynasty has gone underground and remained hidden and controlled the destiny of Jewry and the destiny of the world ever since Shabbatai Tzvi. So they believe they are already in the Messianic era, that they have not violated their Messianic prophecies because the Messiah is here. And that's why they are so desperate to build the third temple so that they can anoint the Messiah in the third temple. And they have to do those things, and it's in the Babylonian Talmud, in the tractate Sanhedrin Folio 20b, where it says that there are three things that they have to do when they return to the land of Israel, Palestine. They have to exterminate Amalek, which they think they did by killing off the Armenians. They have to anoint their king, and they have to rebuild the temple. And that is why they're so desperate to do it. But they already have their king. So they believe that they are not violating their messianic prophecies. And when they say that God brought Hitler, what they're really saying, I'm not saying that this is what the creators of the movie said. This is what I'm saying history says, is that the Messiah of the Jews created Hitler to serve like Moses as a cruel deliverer of the Jewish people from Europe to Palestine. It wasn't God that created Hitler. It was the Jewish bankers that created Hitler.
In the book, Controversy to Zion by Douglas Reed, kind of about the history of Zionism and the creation of Israel. It says, it quotes a rabbi in here who believed that Hitler was the Messiah, and he's the one that allowed, that brought the Jews back to Israel. And I believe it's in this book as well that the transfer agreement sent like 70 or 80,000 Jews to early Palestine, and that without that and all the money, that it wouldn't have been created at the special 1948 time like they wanted.
It probably never would have been created, is what many Jews believe.
Also, let me just read something real quick from here, and this is Controversy of Zion, page 282. This event was the coming of Hitler, and for a while filled the gap left by the collapse of the legend of persecution in Russia, and produced in some Jews a desire to even go to Palestine. For the Zionists, Hitler, had he not arisen, would have needed to be created.
Well, he was created.
And it says, basically, the Zionist adventure was in collapse. Left alone, the Jews of the world would never in any substantial numbers go to Palestine. If events took their natural course, the Arab population evidently would increase its preponderance. At that very moment, the mysterious Hitler arose in Germany, and Mr. Roosevelt in America, and the Second World War loomed ahead. So, can you talk a little bit about, or do you want to get into this Rebbe, or do you want to talk Herzl and anti-Semitism and how they will use that to create their own state? Which do you think is
Well,
better?
it all ties in together. The first Rebbe, Shneur Zalman, said that he wanted the Jews to side with the Russian Empire against the Napoleonic Empire because Napoleon was acting as the Messiah and was very friendly to the Jews, emancipated the Jews, and wanted the Jews to assimilate into the French Empire. He tried to take Palestine for them and restore them there. And the first Rebbe, Shneur Zalman, said, no, we don't want the Jews to be emancipated. We don't want the Jews to be friendly to the Gentiles. We want there to be strong anti-Semitic hatred so that it will preserve the Jewish race and the Jews will not assimilate. And then we have the last Rebbe saying that the Holocaust was an act of God because it cut off a sick limb of the Jewish people so that the stem could be preserved. And I have numerous quotes in the book of Zionists saying that you can't kill off the Jewish people because you can only kill off a certain percentage of them, and then there will be a remnant to restock. And that remnant will be the healthiest, strongest Jews who remain loyal to their people. So Jewry, under this Chabad-Lubavitch Rebbe dynasty, has always sponsored anti-Semitism because they believe that it is essential to the survival of the Jewish people until such time as the Gentiles are exterminated. Now, these Rebbe's also said horrible things about Gentiles, saying that their soul is lower than the soul of Jews and evil and derives from the supernal refuse and is garbage and is what is the cause of the chaos and destruction of God's creation, and that God's creation can only be purified once the Gentiles are exterminated. And these Chabad Lubavitch Rebbe's are celebrated by Donald Trump's family. And the same people who celebrate Hitler are the same ones who told us that Donald Trump would be the savior of the white race, the savior of America, and preserve us, and was playing 4 or 5D chess against the Jews, which was all complete nonsense. And I was one of the only voices who was warning people that Trump is absolutely in bed with Russia, Israel, and Chabad Lubavitch, and that there was a trio of leaders, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who were in bed with the Hasidic rabbis of Chabad Lubavitch, and that they would lead us into disaster, and that Trump would surrender our military technologies and our military intelligence to Israel and to Russia, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's a complete traitor to the United States of America, and he is setting us up for absolute disaster.
I know, it really pisses me off, anybody that's like still trying to suck people back into the left-right game, and we got to support Trump because he's not a communist, and even though he's a Zionist, he's not he's not that bad, he's the lesser of two evil. We need somebody totally different. Let me bring you back a little bit to
it's important because it's such a strong parallel to what Hitler did. Mm-hmm. Hitler tried to lead the Germans to believe that he would be the savior of them from Bolshevism and from Jewry, and instead he delivered them into the hands of the Bolsheviks, killed millions of them, and established the state of Israel. And Trump is exactly the same thing, and that's why these people who pretend to worship Hitler hate me so much, because I expose both Trump and Hitler. And this whole process that the communists use of these neo-Nazi stooges and the original Nazi stooges to set up our people so that the communists can take us over, because they want us to engage in massive self-consuming wars that will invite the conditions in which communism can thrive, and then they will overtake us. And Vladimir Putin is one of the key agents behind all this. He was a KGB chieftain. He was the director of the FSB, and he is setting up these neo-Nazi movements in America to subvert us and to create an artificial war with Antifa, the anti-fascists, which are also controlled by the KGB, the FSB, and Mossad. And they want us fighting each other and destroying ourselves. Well, he sits in Moscow and laughs at us. And Benjamin Netanyahu sits in Israel and laughs at us. And Donald Trump is working for both of them to destroy us. And we better wake up to these facts real quick and get some people into our government who are for, of, and by our people and represent our best interests, and who don't try to draw us into the communist trap of getting into wars and consuming ourselves and fighting each other so that the communists can take us over.
Yeah, the New York, Moscow, Tel Aviv triangle, the Chabad Mafia, Kosher Nostra, and you write about the kosher Nazis and the controlled opposition groups in Putin's Reign of Terror. It's another one of your books. The links will all be below, cjbbooks.com. Let me read on this about using anti-Semitism is so vital for Judaism. So Alan Dershowitz, who's close to Trump and Epstein and Chabad and all these networks, wrote in his book in 1997, Jews paradoxically need enemies in order to survive. That anti-Semitism is what has kept Judaism alive. So they thrive on it. And then also Herzl says this is from your book, part 1. A quote from Herzl: "Whether we like it or not, we are now and shall henceforth remain a historic group with unmistakable characteristics common to us all. We are one people," meaning Jews. "Our enemies have made us one without our consent, as repeatedly happens in history. The governments of all countries scourged by anti-Semitism will serve their own interests in assisting us to obtain the sovereignty we want." So talk about Herzl's predictions of anti-Semitism and how Hitler fulfilled that.
Herzl established, in his book, he said that Jews should establish a Jewish company and the Society of Jews. And he said that what we will do is we will have Jews sell off their assets to anti-Semitic governments, and then those anti-Semitic governments will provide us with goods and ship the Jews down to Palestine and help us seize the land of Palestine. And that became the transfer agreement. Mm-hmm. And Herzl said that Zionism could not thrive without anti-Semitism. He called the anti-Semites his best friends, and he established parameters of what would be required to establish a nation in Palestine. And they always knew that they couldn't transfer that many Jews. The land couldn't support it. They would have to start out with a small number. And he and many other Zionists said that it would have to be the healthiest, strongest Jews. They didn't want old Jews. They didn't want Jewish children or babies. They wanted young adults who were the fittest and smartest to go down there and establish the nation of Palestine. And I believe that's why part of the Holocaust was this natural selection process of killing off the weakest Jews through disease, starvation, and actual selection of who would be killed immediately and who would not. And I'm not saying that they had gas chambers and gassed 6 million Jews, which is a bunch of crap. I'm saying that they did allow the Zionists to come into the concentration camps and handpick the fittest, best Jews to survive and go down to Palestine. And prior to that, they ensured that there would be pressure on Jewish professionals to kick them out of the professions so that they would have a strong incentive to sell off their assets to the German government, put £1,000 in a German bank. And this is all exactly what Hitler wrote, what Herzl, I confused the two, what Herzl wrote about in his book, The Jewish State. He said that they would set up a bank in Germany and a bank in Palestine. The bank, he didn't specify Germany, but he said that basically this process would take place with the Jewish company, whereby they would put their funds in the government. The government would then allow the Jew to move down to Palestine. The British would let him in because he had the £1,000 that was required. The British had control of Palestine under the Palestine Mandate. And then the Germans would give the Zionists £1,000 worth of goods to sell in the Middle East or to use. And then when that was sold or used, when the Jew emigrated down, he would get land or goods worth £1,000. And there was a man named Sam Cohen who wanted to profit from Herzl's scheme. And he tried to make it all cashless for the Jew, but he and his company, Hanatia, would get this £1,000 worth of goods, would sell them. And this man owned property investment. He was a land broker. And he would put the Jew who moved down to Palestine onto land and keep him as an indentured slave and not allow him to have any cash. He would supply him with the goods and the land, but not any cash, so that that Jew who came down there would have no means to leave. So they would trap these Jews in Palestine. And they utilized all these funds to keep Hitler afloat and to build the nation of Palestine. Now, Hitler in 1933 was in serious trouble. We were in the heights of the Depression. Germany was largely an export nation, and it couldn't import the raw materials it needed to produce the goods that it needed to export, and there were boycotts against its export. So the big Jews got together and said, you either agree to the transfer agreement or we will instigate these boycotts against you, and we will publish all kinds of atrocity propaganda against Germany in the press. And that would have ruined the Nazi revolution, and probably communists would have taken over. And they didn't want that. They wanted there to be a war between Germany and the communists. So they kept Hitler in power by financing him through this transfer agreement. Now, they didn't do this to convince Hitler. They did this to convince all the sincere Nazis who genuinely were trying to save Germany from these Jewish bankers.
And it's interesting, you know, they founded, Herzl was at the World Zionist Congress, and he founded the Jewish National Fund, which was the fundraising for them to set up and start building in Palestine. And Trump won the Jewish National Fund award in the early 1980s, the Tree of Life Award, and it was the Rothschilds who funded the first settlements to grow for grape vineyards, to grow wine, which is like a biblical thing that they will go back and plant vineyards.
Yeah, and they will also destroy all the groves and vineyards of the Palestinians.
And interesting, too, that now we have a Trump figure who they call Cyrus that's going to help them rebuild the temple. They call him the head of Edom, which they believe is either going to repent and help them build the temple and be Noahides or be destroyed. And his daughter, Ivanka, has married into the Chabad supremacist Jewish cult, and they're calling her Esther, which is like, both of those ways, it means that the people of America, the patriots, the people that are really standing up, the Esau's that are standing up to Jacob and persecuting him for no reason, are going to be genocided, basically.
And who is our alternative in the election campaign? Bloomberg and Sanders. Bloomberg, the capitalist Jew, and Sanders, the communist Jew. So what are our options? Chabad Lubavitch, open communism, and exploitive capitalism. Why isn't there a normal, natural American running who can win in the American presidential campaign? Why do they have absolute control over all three of the leading candidates at this time? Complete control.
Because it's been the century of the Jews, and after World War I and World War II, they've just come out on top big time.
Well, they completely control it, and they control it by default because nobody stands up, and people are so easily duped into supporting Trump as if he's some kind of opposition to all this. And the horrible thing is that they have brought us so far down that we see Trump as the lesser of two evils instead of as part of the cabal of evil. That's how far down we have allowed them to bring us.
So let's talk about the Rebbe and God as a surgeon. This is just from 2007. This is quite frankly amazing. The Lubavitcher Rebbe Schneerson described the Holocaust by comparing God to a surgeon who amputates a patient's limb in order to save his life.
Well, he's being honest. That's the way they viewed it. They thought that these 6 million Jews were the souls of the Jews who committed the sins in the past. Jews believe in reincarnation. A lot of people don't realize that. They think that all the souls of humanity originally stemmed from Adam and that Adam had both male and female souls in him. They believe that their God is a hermaphrodite, and Adam was created in the image of their God, which made Adam a hermaphrodite. So Adam contained both male and female and all the souls. And they especially believe he contained the souls of the Jews, male and female. And Eve was constructed out of Adam because Adam was created in God's image, and God is a hermaphrodite, according to them. So we have this idea of reincarnation, metempsychosis, throughout Judaism. And that is one of the reasons why they believe that this Shabbatai Tzvi is still alive today and that Menachem Mendel Schneerson is still alive today, because they believe that these souls transmigrate. And of course, they got all this from Hinduism, and they really believe in reincarnation. So they believe that the souls of the 6 million supposed Jews who were killed in the Holocaust are the reincarnation of the souls of the Jews who disobeyed God and married non-Jews and were led astray to worship the gods of foreign wives like Solomon was. And that's why Solomon's temple was destroyed, because he had foreign wives and he established temples for those foreign wives and disobeyed their gods. And that's why in Moses' time they worshiped the golden calf and there was the mixed multitude. And eventually the Jews got whittled down to 70 Jews going to the nation of Israel. Those 70 Jews are symbolic of the 70 grandchildren of Noah who formed the 70 nations. And there are 70 princes who rule over the 70 nations. And those 70 princes live on the planets in our solar system. And they believe that the 71st prince is Samael, whom they call Jesus Christ, and that he betrays the Gentiles every year as in exchange for the gift of a scapegoat. They send out a scapegoat to Azazel, who is the 71st prince of the 70 princes of the nations, and that he then puts all the sins of the Jews onto the Gentiles. And that's exactly what they did with Adolf Hitler, is they put the sins of Adolf Hitler onto the Gentiles when they themselves were responsible. So they continue to utilize the Holocaust, which they deliberately created, as a means of scapegoating all Gentiles, as if Esau, who hates Jacob, and Jacob tricked Esau into believing this.
And this is what Hagee believes as well. And Hagee, you know, True News calls him Rabbi Hagee. They wonder if he's converted to be a Noahide, and he wears, I think he wears the prayer shawls and stuff. So he's in with, you know, Kufi, the highest levels of Zionism. He's their biggest guy to convert the Christians. This is what he 2015, he said, half-breed Jew committed Holocaust, claims Netanyahu ally John Hagee. He says Adolf Hitler was a half-breed Jew and states that Hitler was sent by God as a hunter, which is Esau, to persecute Europe's Jews and drive them towards, quote, the only home God ever intended for the Jews to have, Israel. So Hagee
Well, the Jews believe that they have the mythology of Esau and Jacob being born as twins from who could inherit the covenant of Abraham through Isaac. Mm-hmm. And Esau was born first, and Jacob tried to grab his heel as he was coming out of the womb so that Jacob could be born first. And grabbing the heel is an idiom in Hebrew for tricking the Gentiles. So Esau came out. He was to inherit the covenant. He was supposed to be this woolly hunter, and Jacob tricked Isaac and stole the covenant from Esau and had Esau surrender his covenant for a bowl of lentils, which are red, so that he could then surrender his covenant, because Esau went out hunting and he was unsuccessful and he was starving. So Jacob tricked him into surrendering his birthright to the covenant with a bowl of lentils. And he was supposedly had red hair, and the lentils are red, and the Edomites supposedly have red hair. So Esau obviously became outraged that Jacob had done this to him and had tricked Isaac, who had poor vision, by putting on goat skin to make it seem that his skin was furry. So Jacob also tricked Isaac, and he stole the birthright from Esau. Now Esau swore revenge against him, and God promised to Esau that his covenant would be to serve Jacob as a soldier and as a slave, but that he would eventually break the yoke of Jacob. And that would be the times of the Gentiles, which happened at the time of Christ, which was the changing of the age from Aries to Pisces. Remember that Moses blew the shofar, the ram's horn, and that was symbolic of Aries. And then we have Jesus as the fish, symbolic of Pisces, who instigated the age of the Gentiles when Esau would break the yoke of Jacob and come to rule the earth. Now that period has ended, and we are transitioning back into what will be the Messianic era of the age of Aquarius, where Saturn rules. And the Jews will then be empowered to exterminate the Gentiles. All this was planned. It is happening exactly, precisely to the year according to their schedule. And we are in grave danger, because now the times of the Gentiles are supposed to end, which means the Gentiles are supposed to end.
And you want to wonder, if you wonder where all this anti-white, anti-European stuff is coming from, this is the root cause of it, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. And the story of Esau and Jacob, that Esau hates Jacob for stealing the birthright. Jacob tricks Esau through his hatred into serving as Jacob's soldier and slave. All that was predicted in Genesis, and it's the plan they're following.
So, and this is what Hagee says also. So Hitler was sent by God as a hunter to persecute Europe's Jews and drive them towards Israel, or to
And he
Palestine.
identifies him as Esau.
Hagee's book, Jerusalem Countdown, says Esau's descendants would produce a lineage that would attack and slaughter the Jews for centuries. Esau's descendants included Haman, whose diabolical mind conceived the final solution of the Old Testament, the extermination of all Jews living in Persia. But then Esther reversed it, and then they slaughtered all the non-Jews, which is what they want to bring back again, have a modern-day Purim, essentially. And it says, what?
Absolutely.
Esau's descendants, who produced the half-breed Jews of history, have persecuted and murdered the Jews beyond human comprehension. Adolf Hitler was a distant descendant of Esau.
That's why they call him Haman.
And then again, he said,
but the Jews view all Europeans as descendants of Esau.
The way
just
it
as
goes,
they viewed the Armenians and killed 1.5 million of them as the descendants of Esau, who is also referred to as the Amalekites. And there are repeated commandments in the Old Testament that the Jews have to exterminate the Amalekites. And those commandments are repeated in the Talmud and in Kabbalah. And it is a prerequisite that they do it when they enter the land of Palestine, which they have. And that means they have to kill off all Europeans.
I have a clip of a rabbi saying that the end times won't come unless they kill the Amalekites and build the temple. I think it's right here.
And that is why the Torah tells us that there are 3 mitzvahs that the Jew has to do when he comes into the land of Israel. Eretz Yisrael, Eretz, the land, says the Medrash, means etymologically a place where you run to do the will of God. So when a Jew enters into Eretz, into the land of Israel, what should he do? The first thing, appoint a king. What does that mean?
Moshiach.
Accept the yoke of God unconditionally. If you want to or not, do the mitzvah. Even if you do the mitzvah out of coldness, still do the mitzvah. Step 2, destroy Amalek. Now, do the mitzvah with warmth, with excitement. When you begin to do the mitzvah with excitement, then you have the third aspect, the third mitzvah, which is to build a holy temple, a place where you and God will meet. Because God only meets in a place where a Jew does a mitzvah with joy.
Okay, there we go. Those are the three things that have to
That's
happen.
exactly what I said before, and it's found in the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin, Folio 20b.
Oh, I know all the stuff you say. I can find rabbis saying the exact same thing. Here's a little more. John Hagee in the sermon said that Nazis had operated on God's behalf to chase the Jews from Europe and shepherd them to Palestine. According to Reverend Adolf Hitler was a hunter, Esau, sent by God, who was tasked with expediting God's will of having the Jews reestablish a state of Israel. And Hagee preached, and they are hunters should hunt them that will be the Jews from every mountain and from every hill and from out of the holes of the rocks. If that doesn't describe what Hitler did in the Holocaust, you can't see that. He goes on. Theodor Herzl, the father of Zionism, he said, God wants us to live in Israel, so went to the Jews of Europe and said, I want you to come and join me in the land of Israel. So few Jews went that Herzl went into a depression. Those who came founded Israel. Those who did not went through the hell of the Holocaust.
And before Herzl was Heckler, who was a reverend in Victorian England, and he tried to get Queen Victoria to help the Jews go to Palestine, and it wasn't successful because the British ministry wouldn't send transmit the letters that he had written to the Sultan of Turkey to try to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. And then Heckler told Herzl that there would be an anti-Semitic movement which would do great harm to the Jews, but it would result in their getting Palestine. And this was in the 1880s, I believe, or 1890s. And then Heckler later told other people that there would be a Holocaust against the Jews, and that would be the pretext for their going to Palestine, and they would succeed. So he tried to keep them all hopeful in the Zionist movement. And he prescribed exactly what would happen. He knew what would happen, which proves that it was a plan. Hitler was a plan. And people have to realize that Hitler was a nobody in the Wehrmacht, in the German army. And he was made into what became the Nazi leader, the Fuhrer, the Messiah of the Jews. There's even a book called How Hitler Was Made, which talks about it a little bit, but it doesn't get into the fact that it was the Jewish bankers who set it all up. Hitler was not made by his will to power. He was deliberately constructed. He was funded. He had Wehrmacht agents who would attend his speeches and loudly clap for him as a claque to make it appear that he had broad support. The whole thing was a setup, and he started out as a Bolshevik, working politically for Kurt Eisner and for Eugen Leviné in the communist Bavarian Republic, which became a Leninist Soviet republic. And Hitler was there helping them, serving as a bodyguard and serving as a liaison for the soldiers' councils. And Soviet means councils. He was serving as the soldiers' Soviet liaison.
So people that have a hard time trying to understand that Hitler was against communism and against the Bolsheviks, you're saying that he was, Kurt Eisner was a communist or socialist, and he went to his funeral and he worked for them, and that they put him in as a mole to be, and built him up to be the controlled opposition to ultimately ensure that Germany was destroyed and they could fulfill everything, this anti-Semitism, and create Israel.
Very well said, and the proof of that is insurmountable. If you read Volume 1 and Volume 2 of my books, you can come to no other conclusion. And the head of the military intelligence agency, Karl Meyer, Captain Karl Meyer, wrote an article called I Was Hitler's Boss. And he lays it out, how Hitler was made by these people, by Ludendorff and by the Wehrmacht, to become this leader of this anti-Semitic party. And he doesn't reveal the fact that Hitler was doing this to set up and create a communist Eastern European empire in the land of Palestine. But he reveals very clearly that Hitler was a nobody. He was a nothing. He was an absolute puppet from beginning to end.
And they like to carry out stuff by like dualism and Hegelian dialectic and controlled opposition. Like these Kabbalists are really into the dialectics, correct?
And dualism to the Kabbalists means that evil is good. They believe that everything comes from God, which means that evil comes from God, and that they can atone and achieve redemption through sin. And the biggest sin that they could commit would be to kill 6 million Jews themselves. So they believe that they obtained redemption and atonement through that act of sinning.
Let's finish up a little bit of this. It says, Jeremiah wrote it. This is Hagee. It was the truth and it is the truth. How did it happen? Because God allowed it to happen. Why did it happen? Because God said, my top priority for the Jewish people is to get them to come back to the land of Israel. And then it says, tracing back to this, so this idea of half-breed Jews traces back to Esau, seems to originate from the theological ideas from the fringe, racist, white supremacist Christian identity movement. I don't think he's getting this from the Christian identity movement, though. I think he's getting it from the rabbis that he talks to, because Christian identity just says that they're the true.
The idea that the worst anti-Semites are Jews who breed with Gentiles. Half-breed Jews are the worst anti-Semites. Jews have always said that.
Mm-hmm.
And
they also write here that this.
But it's the horrible sin of mixing Jewish blood with non-Jewish blood. Ezra would tear out his beard and shred his clothes when he heard that Jews were marrying non-Jews. It's the worst sin in Jewry to assimilate, to marry non-Jews and mix divine Jewish blood with non-Jewish blood. So they view those people as the most evil people and the people who have to be exterminated. And that's how they justified the idea that they were going to attack European Jewry, because European Jewry, especially in Germany, was assimilating. And they believed that assimilation was a form of genocide. So they asserted that since these Jews were assimilating and committing genocide against the Jewish people, it was legitimate to commit genocide against European Jewry.
And they didn't want to go to Palestine either, so they kind of deserved it. So I remember some Jewish person said that the miscegenation for Jews is like a Holocaust also.
Absolutely. That was the Zionist theme from beginning to end, and they still assert it. So they want there to be anti-Semitism because anti-Semitism promotes their desire for segregation. And in my book, I prove that it was Jews who created the ghetto system. Eichmann said when he moved into Poland, there was no need to create ghettos because the Jews had already done it. All he needed to do was brick it in and put barbed wire around it. Mm-hmm. And I have quotes from Poles and other people. And even in ancient times, in Alexandria, the Jews formed a Jewish segregated quarter. They formed a Jewish ghetto in Alexandria. And Herzl coined the phrase world ghetto, and he wanted Palestine to be the world ghetto. So what Hitler did was create the concentration camps and ghettos to establish the concentration of people to form this world ghetto in Palestine. This was planned 2,000 years ago. It was a crypto-Jew, Tiberius Julius Alexander, who destroyed the Alexandrian Jews from whence he came and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. It was a Jew who did that, not the Romans, a crypto-Jew working under Titus to serve the interests of the rich Alexandrian Jews and to fulfill Jewish prophecy, to begin to have Esau break the yoke of Jacob and begin the time of the Gentiles at the transition of the age between Aries and Pisces. It was a Jew, Tiberius Julius Alexander, who was the one who sent the Jews into the diaspora, which is another Jewish prophecy. Mm-hmm. That they would be scattered to the ends of the earth so that they could spread monotheism and destroy all the other indigenous religions, which they set about to do with Christianity.
And by destroy all the other cultures, you mean be a light unto the nations, of course, right? And heal the world.
Yeah, a
or
flame.
cause the birth pangs and destroy the world. Also, they're going to do some of
Well,
both,
the
right?
birth pangs weren't to commence until after the times of the Gentiles, the age of Pisces. At the end of the age of Pisces, then the birth pangs of the Messianic age would begin. In the Talmud, it specifies that there will be three 2,000-year periods, and the ages last for 2,000 years each. And so we had the period from Adam to Abraham, we had the period from Abraham to Christ, and we had the period from Christ to Hitler. And those represent the three ages. After that, that's 6,000 years, you have the Sabbath, the 7,000th years. And we are now entering the Sabbath millennium, when the earth gets healed like a jubilee. They allow everything to rest, and there are birth pangs at the beginning of that transition of the ages. And those birth pangs include pestilence, disease, which we see with coronavirus. They include nuclear war, which is prophesied in Zechariah. They include climate change, the warming of the earth. All these things the Jews predicted.
Amazing. And
it is amazing.
And
it's amazing how much power they have to fulfill their own prophecies. They're not doing it with their God. They're doing it themselves. And Hitler was their agent to do it.
Self-fulfilling. And here Huffington Post is kind of talking about what we're talking about here. She says this is rewriting the Holocaust by recasting the victims of Nazi persecution, such as Jews, liberals, and communists, and homosexuals, as having been themselves the architects of Nazi persecution and the Holocaust. So let's move into what Schneerson said.
Well, it's not the right wing. It was Rebbe Schneerson and the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, Ovadia Yosef, said exactly that it was the sins of these Jews which led to the Holocaust, so that God could purge these sinners, which would obtain atonement for the remnant of the Jewish people. And the Jews always predicted that 2/3 of Jewry would be destroyed and only 1/3 would return to Palestine. And Max Nordau created the concept that was dubbed catastrophic Zionism, and I write about this in my book, whereby he said 600,000 Jews should go to Palestine. And he said that 1/3, 200,000, would die of starvation and disease, and that 200,000, the second third, would flee and leave Palestine, and that 1/3 would remain. 200,000 would remain in Palestine and form the Jewish state. And he said this in the 1920s, and he was another one of the so-called political Zionists who made his political Zionism to the letter fulfill Jewish messianic prophecy. And the reason that they utilized the idea that they were political is because the Roman Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church opposed, as did the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, opposed the idea that the Jews should return to Palestine, because contrary to the dogma that Christian Zionists had been fed by crypto-Jews, Christianity opposes the return of the Jews to Palestine. Jews are to convert to Christianity. That is the only means that they have to gain salvation. And that was stated by Cyprian in the first couple of centuries AD.
I know the Pope was against creating the state of Israel, correct? In 48?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's get into this Rebbe Schneerson, what he says.
So my point is they had to pretend to be political and not religious, because if they said that they were being religious, they would be viewed as the Antichrist and as al-Dajjal by Muslims. So they had to pretend that it was political when it was truly religious.
And you hear this a lot, that they weren't even religious Jews, they were atheist Jews that created Zionist, and the true Torah Jews, they're anti-Zionist and stuff, but it really was a religious movement.
Absolutely. They say the same thing about the communist Jews, that Trotsky was an apostate Jew, or not even an apostate Jew, an atheistical Jew, and that therefore the Jewish people aren't responsible for the 30 million people that Leon Trotsky mass murdered deliberately to try to create white Negroes out of the Russian people.
So let me read a bit of what the Rebbe says here.
They play it both ways. They say that we're not religious, and then they say that non-religious Jews aren't Jews. there's no Scotsman in Jewry.
Yeah, they do like to have it both ways. On the subject of the Holocaust, the Rebbe wrote as follows, quote, "It is clear that no evil descends from above, and buried within torment and suffering is a core of exalted spiritual good." So he's saying the Holocaust was spiritual good. Not all human beings are able to perceive it, but it is very much there. So it is not impossible for the physical destruction of the Holocaust to be spiritual beneficial. On the contrary, it is quite possible that physical affliction is good for the spirit.
And that's that dualism, that evil is good.
Schneerson goes on to compare God to a surgeon who amputates a patient's limb in order to save his life. The limb is incurably diseased. The Holy One, blessed be he, like the professor surgeon, seeks the good of Israel, and indeed all he does is done for the good. In the spiritual sense, no harm was done because the everlasting spirit of the Jewish people was not destroyed.
And the Zionists always said that. Herzl said you can't destroy the Jewish people because when we rise, we become the financial elite, and when we fall, we become the revolutionary party. So that any weapons the anti-Semites try to use against us cut themselves.
The Rebbe's stance, therefore, is clear. The Holocaust was a good thing because it lopped off the disease-ravaged limb of the Jewish people. In other words, the millions who perished in the Holocaust in order to cleanse the Jewish people of its sins.
And this is the man, the movement, the Chabad Lubavitch movement, which has Trump by the nose, and has Vladimir Putin by the nose, and has Benjamin Netanyahu by the nose. And those three world leaders are working for this guy, Schneerson. And he said horrible things about Gentiles.
And then they say
they believe he's been reincarnated and is alive today, and they believe he is the Messiah.
And then he says that the Holocaust took place not only with God's knowledge, but also with his approval. Schneerson says God was there and that he wanted the Holocaust to happen, but because it is inconceivable in his view for God to commit evil, he portrays the Holocaust as a positive event, all the more so for the Jews.
Well, the man who appointed him to become the next Rebbe was rescued by the Nazis and sent to America. That he would not have existed as the Rebbe were it not for the Nazis, because it was the Nazis who had their hands on the sixth Rebbe, I think it was Yitzhak Schneerson, and they delivered him safely to the United States of America so that he could get this guy, Menachem Schneerson, to be the seventh Rebbe. And they always predicted that there would only be 7 Rebbes and then the Messianic era would commence. There will be no 8th Rebbe.
Amazing, this 7th millennium, 7th Rebbe, 7 Noahide laws.
It's because Saturn is in the 7th heaven. Saturn is the planet that they worship. They're star worshippers, and they believe their god inhabits Saturn, and that their god is a hermaphrodite.
Schneerson explained Schneerson's explanations were based on the Torah. Hitler was a messenger of God in the same sense that Nebuchadnezzar is called God's servant in the book Jeremiah. The surgery he spoke of was such a massive corrective procedure that the suffering, the murder of the Jews was minor compared to the curative effect.
And they're saying something similar about Trump, that he's Cyrus.
And this is exactly what Rothschild and Warburg's buddy Kalergi wrote in his book, which came out in 1925, like 20 years before, this stuff is supposed to have happened. And it says,
well, Hitler was very active in 1925.
Yeah, but there was no...
He didn't become chancellor until 33, but he was quite active in 1925.
So right before, he predicted that instead of destroying European Jewry, Europe against its own will refined and educated the people into a future leader nation through this artificial selection process. So like eugenics, basically. No wonder that this people that escaped ghetto prison developed into a spiritual nobility of Europe, provided Europe with a new race of nobility by the grace of spirit. This happened at the moment when Europe's feudal aristocracy became dilapidated thanks to Jewish. And then he also says that all the other races will be mixed.
Yes, that they will resemble the ancient Egyptians. And in that book you showed, the cover of it, it showed something from the United Nations, the UNESCO man, and he looks like the ancient Egyptians that Kalergi said that they were going to convert Europeans into. Kalergi wanted to commit genocide against the Europeans by mixing them with Asians and Africans until they became like coffee mixed with cream. Yeah,
This is what they promote on National Geographic too, like the future human is just like some mixed hybrid of all the races together. While they're very ethnocentric and they're all about marrying, you know, birthright and marrying, keeping it in the tribe.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't ask you how long I was gonna go, but I've got a couple clips here that I wanted people to see. This is all about Esau and persecution, how important it is. It's spiritual that Esau persecutes them to make them stronger. I'm going to play this, Chris.
Moses, they used to quote Moses, the Zionists used to quote Moses as causing the persecution of the Jews and therefore refining them and making them stronger. And the Bible has many references to the idea that the Jews will be tried as gold is tried in the furnace and as silver is tried, and they will be refined. So it's eugenics through persecution.
Okay, let's play this.
They also said that in Ezekiel 37, it talks about the dry bones prophecy, that God will raise and put flesh on the bones of the Jews to build up an army. And I think that was one of the ideas of the Holocaust, was to put new flesh on the Jews and to improve their genetic stock. They also had predictions, which again in that book it talks about the idea, and it talks in the Jewish utopia that, and in Isaiah, I think chapter 61, that the future Jews in the Messianic age will be tall and beautiful. So they had to change their genetic stock in order to fulfill the dry bones prophecy and to fulfill the prophecy that they will be tall and beautiful in the Messianic age. And Williams, in that book you showed, the Utopia, World Utopia, or whatever it is, said that, quoted from Israeli newspapers, that in the 1950s, there started to appear all kinds of Jews who looked like Swedes and not Jews, and that these were children, and that the children were undergoing terrible trauma when they were told by their adopted parents that they were Jews because they knew they weren't Jews. So again, like they want to do to anti-Semites, they put them through psychological treatment to try to convince them that they were Jews and alleviate the trauma of being told they were Jews. And I think that that was also part of this process, and it's Williams who really said it, of fulfilling the idea that in the Messianic age, Jews will be tall and beautiful. And they have always been envious of the beautiful Nordic European peoples. Benjamin Disraeli wrote in several of his books about how beautiful the Nordic race was. So I think they want to emulate the Nordic race in the Messianic era.
Well, I can't blame them for that.
No, they have good taste as far as that goes.
Yeah, they like their shiksas, their dirty, unpure. I got a clip of a rabbi I put up the other day. He goes, the goyim are unpure because they have demons that are around them all the time, basically.
Not only that, they believe they're impure because they are demon. They're from the supernal refuge. They're evil. That they corrupted the perfect universe, which is why it is the mission of the Jews to exterminate them. As above, so below. Now, this all I believe, and I think this is a novel theory of mine as well, this Talmudic Kabbalistic concept of as above, so below, just as they believe that they want their god, Saturn, to rule all the other gods. They are not monotheistic. They think the universe is filled with gods, but that their God is a jealous and wrathful God and punishes humans who don't worship it. And their God does that because if humans don't worship the other gods, then the other gods die. So they turn that around, as above, so below, that the Jewish people are a wrathful and jealous people, and that they have to kill off the Gentiles so that there are no Gentiles left to worship other gods. And then their God will reign, Saturn will reign, and the Jews will reign on the earth. And they have this prophecy that there will be a new earth in the Messianic age. And they believe that this new earth will be an earth only inhabited by Jews, just as Saturn is inhabited by their hermaphroditic God. So they want it as above, so below. They want Saturn ruled by their God, all other gods killed off, and all Gentiles killed off, so that Jews can be the single jealous and wrathful people on the earth, just as their god Saturn is the single and jealous and wrathful God in the heavens, as above, so below. That's what the Star of David symbolizes for the Jews, is as above, so below. The arrow pointing up points to Saturn, to their God. The arrow pointing down points to the Jewish people, who are the gods of the earth.
Sounds like lunacy.
It is lunacy, and it's dangerous lunacy, and they're going to kill us all if we don't stop them.
I know. I see it.
People better take that damn seriously, because they're about to do it.
Oh, they are. Watch this. Before I get to this persecuted agent thing of Esau, let me show you this. This is the new show out from Amazon that they're promoting everywhere. There's an article, Why I Love the Shameless, Gory, Nazi-Killing Catharsis of Amazon's Hunters. And you read what this guy says. This is some of his language from this article, where he loves this hunting Nazi show. It says,
well, this isn't the first time they've done. Have you seen that movie, Inglourious Bastards?
Yeah.
Bastards, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah, made by Quentin Tarantino, who's married to an Israeli, and there's a bunch of connections like that with this show as well. But as a Jewish writer, empowering revenge fantasy, unabashed Jewish power fantasy. These are all statements from his article. Simmering resentments, generational therapy, pleasure, a chance to feel empowered in a way Jewish men seldom do, goys, gratuitous satisfaction. They're going to take, and watch this. This is the promotion that they have for this show. They played this show for black football players to try to encourage and persuade black people to go out and attack white people that talk about Jews, basically. That's the way I see it. And this is from the show. Watch this.
Hey there, America. Lonnie Flash here alongside Yolanda, presenting you with a little knowledge on this beautiful afternoon. Who's ready for some knowledge?
Our segment is entitled, How to Find a Nazi.
So, how to find a Nazi. They're going to describe how to find a Nazi. For this is in the show, like episode 3. Watch this.
Useful tips on identifying Hitler's finest in everyday life. Ready, Lonnie?
Ready, Yolanda.
Try to find Nazis in everyday life. The creator of the show said this is from our modern era. They're trying to incite violence and genocide towards anybody that talks about Jews. Listen to what they say here.
Number 1. Now, this is an easy one. If your neighbor waves hello with his arm in a perfect 45-degree angle and invites you over to see his new walk-in oven he's been building in his garage, you might want to take a rain check. That could mean you've got a Nazi next door. Yolanda, number 2.
White people.
White people. That's what this is about. White people are Nazis.
Well, look at what's happening. Jacob is tricking Esau into killing off Esau.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob, the Jew, is tricking that little black girl, and it's highly offensive that they're putting this child into this position and representing this as if this is the way that black people feel towards white people.
Mm-hmm.
This is vicious, nasty stuff they're doing. And Jewry is going to kill us off if we don't stand up for ourselves.
This is incitement for a genocide. Absolutely.
And it's completely misrepresenting black people to try to generate hatred among whites. Well, let's put it this way. It could potentially generate hatred of whites towards blacks, as well as generating hatred of blacks towards whites.
Mm-hmm. They're trying to instigate divide and conquer with whites and everybody else, for sure. Here, a little more, it gets even worse.
3.
And they're using a child to do it.
Yep.
A girl child to do it. That's horrendous.
It's filth. It gets even worse.
It would never be tolerated in this country when I was a young man. This would never be tolerated in this country. This is horrible. This is a direct incitement to violence against us.
Absolutely. I've done like 3 videos on it. I've been covering it in every video since it came out. It gets even worse. Watch this.
He's drawing a swastika on a notebook or a friend. Chances are this classmate may be a fan of Hitler. Yolanda, 4?
White people.
Yolanda, not all white people are Nazis.
But, Lonnie, all Nazis are white people.
Okay, that about sums it up.
All Nazis
Look
are
at how
white
they're
people.
misrepresenting with a child the views of black people. To pit us against one another. Well, the Jews go unscathed. This is horrible. This is absolutely horrible.
It's disgusting.
And why the hell aren't Jewish people standing up and saying this isn't us? Just as you and I are saying this isn't us. We don't view black children in this horrible way as if they're our enemies.
I know.
And it's the whole Sambo thing that the Jews have been doing to the blacks ever since that Jew L. Jolson used to put shoe polish on his face and pretend to be black and mock the idea that blacks are monkeys and idiots and foolish, clownish entertainers for us. They're making a Sambo out of this poor child. It's horrible, absolutely reprehensible.
That's right. So let me play a little bit of this. You're going to love this. This is this rabbi talking about Esau and why it's so spiritual for Esau to persecute Jacob, which is everything that you're talking about right now.
The older will serve the younger. So what is that supposed to mean? You know, if we see that there's a constant rivalry between two kingdoms, right? So what does that mean? Is that the older will serve the younger, right? Is that in the end a resolution? Is that what will happen ultimately? And the answer is yes. The older means whoever comes out first will serve the younger. So of course we know Esau came out first, and of course we know Yaakov came out second. So that prophecy would say that Esau is going to serve Yaakov. In other words, that's the resolution. You shouldn't think that this is going to go on for all time. No, there's going to be a resolution.
And that resolution is Esau, or Christian European West, or all Gentiles, are going to serve Jacob, which is later changed his name to Israel, the Jews, the progenitor of the Jews.
When he says Esau, he's referring to Esau. When he says Jacob, he's referring to Jacob. But that's not the ultimate resolution. That's only the resolution during the times of the Gentiles. The ultimate resolution is that the only way they can protect themselves from the anti-Semite Esau is to kill him.
Well, Esau is also Edom and Amalekites, which it's their blot out their memory and utterly destroy them. Here, it gets even better here.
Whatever happens, the resolution must be where the older will serve the younger. That's the resolution. You see? So in what way? What is that supposed to mean? So therefore, the older will serve the younger if the older remains righteous. Because that's really the job of Esau. The job of Esau is to serve Yaakov. Why? Because the job of Esau is to contend with the world, the physical world, right? And to subdue it toward righteousness, to channel all the physicality toward spirituality. And of course the job of Yaakov is...
monotheism through Christianity is what he's saying.
And to be, well, yeah, the double-edged sword. They don't like Jesus, but they still do like Jesus because that's giving the Christian world the idea of salvation through the Jews and under the Abrahamic religion, and to look to them as chosen people.
And to utilize Christians as their sword. Jacob is not only the servant of Esau, he is the soldier, the mercenary for Jacob. Esau is a soldier and a slave of Jacob. And he is to spread Jewish monotheism, in other words, to destroy the cultures of all Gentiles and the religions of all Gentiles so that their jealous God reigns over all the other gods and kills them off. And then when the Gentiles kill off all of their own gods through this trickery of Jacob, they will be without any supernatural protection. And then the Jews will have an easy time slaughtering Esau, all the Gentiles, because Gentiles will no longer have any supernatural protection because they will have destroyed their own gods.
That's what they believe. Here, a little continuing.
Spirituality. Esau can do it by becoming as an of. Interesting, right? He can do it by becoming a persecutory agent, which he became, right? Or he can do it by helping Yaakov spiritually and assisting him to do the tikkun, one, to do the rectification, and to protect him from nations that want to destroy him. So we see, which is really very important, the real relationship between these two people. The very important idea. So we can imagine, right, that this has been going on for what? Thousands of years. You know, whether it be through Esau or Edom or Rome or Christianity or Western civilization, for instance Europe, with the Holocaust and so on, they have been wiping out the Jews. you see, which is obviously a very important idea.
Wiping out the Jews is a very important idea. How can you not look at Hitler and say he fulfilled their prophecies?
You can't. It's undeniable. Read my books, and I don't think you can come to any other conclusion.
Now, where do you really see this also? Because again, in the end of Parshas Vayishlach, the Torah says, "Ve'ela hamalachim," and these are the kings. It's about to enumerate the descendants of Esav. So it says, "Ve'ela hamalachim," and these are the kings, right, that dwelled in the land of Edom before there was a king in Israel. Esav, who in modern day terms is really basically, certainly one of them is America, and America is slowly turning, especially Trump, toward Israel. We know that the tikkun, the rectification of creation, is done by mitzvahs, commandments, tshuva, repentance, and yisurin, which is suffering. We know that. Now, the one who administers yisurin, we also know, I mentioned before, that there are really 8 persecutory agents. There are 8 countries that when Jews have to be punished in order to atone for whatever sins they did.
Countries that have to punish the Jews to help them atone, and the suffering is a good thing.
Also, he called America Esau.
Yeah.
That means America is Amalekites. And in Deuteronomy and Exodus and throughout the Talmud and Kabbalah, that means Americans have to be exterminated, completely exterminated. Not a single man, woman, or child left alive by commandments from their God, the same God that foolish Christians worship.
And I'm looking
just
for...
called Americans Amalekites.
Yep.
Let that sink in, people. If you have ever read the Bible, you know that that means that Americans have to be exterminated.
That's what the point I'm going to make right now. They want to exterminate the West, Christian European West. Look at this.
Yes.
They're calling Ivanka Esther. Look at this. Can Ivanka Trump become our Queen Esther? And this is what they want. Now more than ever, the Jewish people, as well as other minority groups, need a Queen Esther to challenge the growing demagoguery and not allow those who would commit hateful and criminal acts to feel they will not be punished. So they're talking about anti-Semites in America. Queen Esther was in the right place at the right time to stop the madness described in the book of Esther. Ivanka, you're now in the right place, and this is the right time. Read the book of Esther and step forward. And what? Commit a Purim genocide on Americans.
Yes, and to pretend to be a Gentile. What they're really saying is the Trump family are Jews. She didn't convert to Judaism. Probably the Trump family may have been Jews from the beginning. Who knows? That's the implication anyway. I don't know if that's a fact or not, or one of their fantasies. But Queen Esther was named Hadassah, and that means that which is hidden. So she changed her name to Esther to pretend to be a Gentile so that the king would marry her. And she did that to worm her way into King Ahasuerus' government so that she could commit a genocide and kill 70,000 people. So whether